Many people think that active volcanoes and earthquakes are located somewhere far away. However, nature decided to give a geography lesson and remind us where the real center of planetary catastrophes actually is. On July 20, this region was already shaken by an earthquake with magnitude over 7 points. Most local residents thought they had already received their portion of adrenaline. Seismologists also calmed down. It seemed that accumulated tension had been released, but how wrong they were. What happened on the morning of July 30 made many think. Magnitude 8.8 is not just a strong earthquake, this is a mega event that has serious consequences. But most frightening are not the numbers in reports, but the fact that this event occurred much earlier than scheduled. Nature rudely violated its own rules, and this troubles specialists most because if familiar patterns no longer work, they rack their brains how to forecast further. The rupture focus stretched for 300 kilometers. This entire gigantic crack formed in a matter of seconds, spawning a tsunami that crossed the entire Pacific Ocean and forced millions of people to evacuate from Japan to California. Meanwhile, another local volcano woke up, ejecting ash to 8 kilometers height. Why did this earthquake occur ahead of schedule? What triggered this chain reaction of catastrophes? And most importantly, what will happen in this region next? On the morning of July 30, 2025 in Kamchatka at 11:24 local time, the Earth decided to remind people who the real master is here. The earthquake with magnitude 8.8 became a real monster among seismic events. To understand the scale of what happened, this is the strongest underground tremor in the region in the last 73 years. The earthquake epicenter lay at shallow depth approximately 17 to 30 kilometers below the seabed in the Pacific Ocean, 150 kilometers from Petropavlovsk Kamchatsky. It would seem far enough, but nature showed that distance is a relative concept for such forces. The rupture focus stretched almost 300 kilometers from the southern part of the Shapunsky Peninsula along the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench practically to Cape Lopatka. But most amazing began after the main shock. The Earth seemed unable to calm down. In the first day, seismologists registered more than 200 aftershocks, and by evening their number exceeded 300 noticeable repeated tremors with intensity from 2 to 5 points. These are not just numbers in scientists' reports. Each such tremor made people flinch and look around at walls. Residents of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky felt oscillations of 6-7 point strength. Buildings swayed so strongly that in some churches bells began ringing by themselves. Particularly dramatic were footage from the operating room of the Kamchatka Oncology Dispensary. During the earthquake, doctors were performing complex surgery, and when shaking began, they held equipment with their hands so it wouldn't fall while surgeons continued working. When such colossal force is released under the ocean floor, consequences inevitably reach the most distant corners of the planet. And here begins the most interesting part. A chain reaction of events that in several hours turned a local Kamchatka earthquake into a global threat. The tsunami spawned by underground tremors began its deadly journey across the Pacific Ocean. Billions of tons of water shifted abruptly, creating a wave that began spreading in all directions. The Kuril Islands were first to take the blow. In Severokurilsk, waves reached 3-4 m height and penetrated 200 m deep into the city. The ocean literally advanced on land, sweeping everything in its path. Fish processing plant port facilities, residential houses in the coastal zone. Everything was underwater. But most amazing began when waves reached Japan. All warning systems activated. The country that experienced the Fukushima tragedy in 2011 didn't want to take risks. More than 2 million people received orders to evacuate from coastal areas. Within minutes of receiving signals from seismic stations, the entire warning system was activated. Sirens wailed along the entire eastern coast. Japanese mobile phones exploded with emergency evacuation notifications. Dozens of cities turned into anthills where people grabbed essentials and hurried to high ground. Railways stopped, airports closed. Even nuclear power plants on the coast switched to high alert mode. But waves weren't going to stop. They crossed the entire Pacific Ocean, moving at about 800 kilometers. After several hours, first signs of tsunami reached Alaska. The Aleutian Islands took the blow of waves that, although they lost part of their power over 1,000 kilometers, still posed serious danger. Real panic began in Hawaii. State authorities declared evacuation, urging residents to immediately leave beaches and move at least to fourth floors of buildings or to high ground. Honolulu International Airport canceled and redirected dozens of flights. Some planes already in the air had to be turned back or directed to other airports. The US West Coast also didn't stay aside. In California, Oregon, and Washington, schools closed businesses, stopped work, and roads to the coast were blocked. Meanwhile, members of the Russian Geographical Society expedition on Shumshu Island became unwilling witnesses and victims of marine elements. Their tent camp disappeared in minutes, swept away by a 4-meter wall of water. And here the story takes a completely unexpected turn. While the whole world watched the tsunami spread across the Pacific Ocean, something was happening on Kamchatka itself. Klyuchevskaya Sopka volcano, the highest active volcano, decided to remind everyone of itself. At first, it seemed like coincidence. A volcano in Kamchatka where there are more than 300 began erupting. Common thing, you might say. But everything turned out much more interesting and frightening. The connection between the mega-earthquake and awakening of the fire-breathing mountain was most direct. The director of the Institute of Volcanology and Seismology explained what was happening simply and frighteningly. Previously, eruption was weak, although volcanic fragments flew to heights of 200–300 meters, but here immediately an ejection of several kilometers. Klyuchevskaya Sopka, 4,850 m high, began its fiery show almost immediately after the earthquake. A flow of molten lava flowed down the western slope heading toward Bogdanovich Glacier, and here scientists became truly worried. When lava meets glacier, things happen that make Hollywood disaster movies reality. Glacier melting can lead to formation of powerful mud flows that rush down slopes at express train speed, sweeping everything in their path. A real race began in the river valley. Will lava manage to melt enough ice to create catastrophic flow? But this wasn't the whole picture of what was happening. Seismologists began understanding that something much more complex and large-scale occurred on July 30 than just another strong earthquake. It turned out that tremors on July 20, which initially seemed like a separate event, were actually a foreshock that is harbinger of the main strike. The Earth warned about preparing catastrophe for 10 whole days, but predicting exact time and power of the main strike still proved impossible. Even the most modern seismology methods don't yet allow making such precise forecasts. The Pacific Plate, the size of an entire continent, dives under the Okhotsk Plate. This process, called subduction, lasts millions of years. But from time to time, plates get stuck, tension accumulates, and then such energy release occurs. But what surprised many in this whole story is why, with such monstrous earthquake force, destruction turned out relatively small. Logically, an 8.8 magnitude earthquake should have wiped half of Kamchatka off the face of the Earth. However, this didn't happen. And here's why. If the earthquake focus had occurred on land, there would have been simply terrible casualties and destruction. But it occurred on the seabed, moreover, at a distance of 150 kilometers east of populated areas. The ocean played the role of giant shock absorber, absorbing significant part of seismic energy. Nevertheless, this energy didn't disappear anywhere. It transformed into tsunami that rushed across the entire Pacific Ocean. In some sense, Kamchatka residents were saved at the expense of threat being transferred to the entire Pacific region. Meanwhile, volcanoes continued their frightening show. Besides Klyuchevskaya Sopka, Avachinsky volcano also became active. On July 20, even before the main earthquake, gas emissions to 200–300 meters height were recorded there. Tourists were recommended to refrain from climbing. Now it became clear why Earth was preparing for global shakeup, and volcanoes felt this before people. But real nightmare for Kamchatka residents began not during the earthquake itself, but after it. Imagine you survived the most powerful underground tremor. Your house stood, no one was hurt, and you think, all the worst is behind us. And then begins what seismologists call aftershocks and ordinary mortals call prolonged nightmare. In the first day after the main earthquake, more than 200 repeated tremors occurred. The ground underfoot turned into jelly that constantly shudders and reminds that what happened is not the end of the story, but only its beginning. The strongest of aftershocks reached magnitude 6.5, which itself is quite serious earthquake. Scientists warned that such tremors can continue for a whole month and possibly longer. Moreover, some of them can reach magnitude 7.5. And these are no longer just echoes, but full-fledged earthquakes capable of causing serious damage. And most unpleasant, they can cause new tsunami waves. Many people simply refuse to return to their homes. City parks turned into tent camps where families with children spent nights under open sky, preferring street discomfort to fear of being buried under debris of their own home. Particularly striking was the story of kindergarten number 15 in Petropavlovsk, Kamchatka. The 1,979 building couldn't withstand tremors and partially collapsed. It would seem like tragedy, but no. The kindergarten was undergoing planned renovation and there were no children there. Moreover, grand opening after renovation was planned just 2 days after the earthquake. If tremors had occurred 48 hours later, consequences would have been much sadder. And now the most intriguing part. What happens next? Will Kamchatka really calm down and return to its usual life? Or did July 30, 2025 become the beginning of something much more large-scale? Scientists give ambiguous forecasts. On one hand, the mega-earthquake released colossal amount of accumulated tectonic energy. Tension that built up for decades in the Evacuation seismic gap was discharged. This means probability of repeating such event in coming years significantly decreased. But there's another side of the coin. Pyotr Shibalin from the Institute of Earthquake Prediction Theory (RAS) points to strange feature of what happened. Powerful earthquake in Kamchatka occurs approximately once every 140 years. Only 73 years have passed since 1952. In this sense, such earthquake occurred significantly earlier than it should. It turns out nature violated its own schedule, and this makes one think, what if familiar patterns no longer work? While scientists argue about causes and effects, ordinary people in Kamchatka continue living in state of constant readiness for new tremors. Aftershocks don't stop in just the first 3 days after main earthquake. More than 300 were registered. Some reach magnitude over 6 points, which itself is quite serious event. Specialists are particularly troubled by the fact that current earthquake focus is located very close to focus of 1952 catastrophic event. Then magnitude 9 earthquake caused tsunami that without any warning reached Severo-Kurilsk Hawaiian Islands and caused serious damage. Modern warning systems in 2025 worked much better, but nature's force didn't become less from this. International consequences also turned out more significant than expected. Despite tsunami ultimately not being as destructive as it could have been, the very fact that waves crossed entire Pacific Ocean and forced millions to evacuate showed modern civilization's vulnerability to natural forces. Some scientists express even more alarming assumptions. Alexei Zavyalov, from Institute of Earth Physics, warns that Kamchatka earthquake may not be isolated event, but part of broader activation of seismic activity in Pacific region. According to his observations, following cloud indicators over Earth's crust fractures, the risk zone includes western and southern coasts of South America, where earthquake up to magnitude 8 is possible in coming weeks. And here story takes almost mystical turn. It turns out Kamchatka mega earthquake can trigger chain reaction of seismic events throughout Pacific Ring of Fire. Energy released on July 30 will spread through Earth's crust, creating additional tensions in other vulnerable zones. True, some other seismologists are skeptical of such theories. According to them, earthquake influence on each other decreases with square of distance, and direct connection between events in Kamchatka and, say, Chile is extremely unlikely. But fact remains fact. Our planet showed it's full of surprises. Earthquake occurred earlier than long-term models predicted. Tsunami was less destructive than expected, but reached most distant corners of Pacific Ocean. Volcanoes reacted to underground tremors immediately and continue erupting. This may mean tectonic processes are accelerating. Perhaps global warming and glacier melting that changes pressure on Earth's crust became cause. Or perhaps we simply don't understand enough about processes occurring in Earth's depths. The story of Kamchatka mega earthquake isn't over yet. Aftershocks continue, volcanoes erupt. Scientists analyze data and build new theories. And who knows what other surprises our restless planet has prepared for us. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel.